This is City Talk. I'm Eric Schmidt. Thank you for tuning in. In 2019, the Oregon Legislature passed House Bill 2001. HB 2001 requires Oregon cities and counties to allow a wider variety of housing types in residential neighborhoods. The law says duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters, often known as middle housing, must be allowed on lots where single-family homes are now allowed. On this edition of City Talk, Brian Martin, the City of Beaverton's long-range planning manager, and Rob Zeller, an associate planner with the City of Beaverton, are going to help us navigate how House Bill 2001 will be implemented in the City of Beaverton and what the potential impact of HB 2001 might be going forward. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. So, Brian, just briefly, give us an idea of why the legislature passed this legislation in the first place.
Well, you'd have to talk to the legislators, but from what I understand,
legislative intent.
Yeah, exactly. What I understand is it was a lot about housing supply, because when prices are going up and people are having trouble finding housing that they can afford, adding supply just takes some of the pressure off those increasing housing prices, and just also providing more options for folks, because if you only have single-family homes and apartments, there's a lot of needs in between that different families might have that perhaps aren't being met. So I think those were two of the main reasons.
But the City of Beaverton was already ahead of the curve on this in many ways, was it not?
Yes.
You were already planning for some of this.
Yeah, we did a housing needs analysis in 2015, and it identified that there were some folks in Beaverton or who wanted to live in Beaverton who weren't finding housing that was working for them, whether it was the format or the cost. So we changed our comprehensive plan a couple years later, and one of the provisions in there, one of the policies in there, was that we wanted to explore how we could allow more housing variety in our neighborhoods.
So we're calling this the Housing Options Project, right, Rob?
Yes.
And you're in charge of it, basically putting it all together. How did you decide where you wanted to go when with this project?
Well, I basically wanted to wait until I wanted to start our first round of public engagement just by talking to people about what their needs and priorities are, and just keep an open mind. We didn't have any ideas of where it might go, and just try to look for where there might be prevalent themes. There were three themes that seemed to resonate with people based on their interests. There were people who wanted more flexibility with what they could do with their property. There were people who were concerned about environmental changes, the loss of trees and open space. And then there were people who were somewhat open but were worried about the change in the design of their neighborhoods. And so that basically drove one idea we had, which was how can we come up with an idea where new homes match the size and shape of what's currently there.
I know I've seen your presentation, so I have a bit more of an advantage here than the audience, but your website really covers it well. It's a phased-in project. You're seeking opinion from folks, and then you're going to take a lot of this to City Council very soon.
Yes.
And then it's up to City Council to decide where to go to next.
Exactly. Next Tuesday, July 27th, we'll be meeting with City Council and looking for direction on how we can take these three approaches and develop a preferred approach.
Is there an option not to do anything? Does council have that option?
Well, if the city doesn't change its development code to allow these new housing types, then the city will have to apply the state's model code that they came up with. So there really isn't.
So we're under an edict from the legislature to do something.
Yeah, the do nothing option just means the state created our rules for us.
Yeah. So a single family home could stay where it is, and you could add a structure on a lot? Is that kind of the thinking that you're going for? Or would you have to level the current house and put up something new? I mean, how does this all work? What's the concept that you're working with?
Well, it could go either way. I mean, I think we'll definitely want to make it easier to do internal conversions if we can. If someone wanted to take an existing single-family house and convert it to a duplex, they could also add an accessory dwelling unit, like a small cottage in the back. And there might be pathways to add a couple of units that That hasn't been decided yet, but it could go in a couple different directions.
What about parking?
So interestingly, we do have guidance from the state rules about how much parking we can require.
Really?
Yes.
Ah.
On one end, we could just eliminate off-street parking requirements, but then on the other end, the city could require projects to add parking, and it might differ depending upon housing types, but a general rule is to think of we could allow one parking space per unit, require one parking space per unit. But we couldn't require more. And right now, our current rules require more than one parking space per unit, so that's something that would have to change.
What about public transportation? What role does it play in the planning process here? You don't have a lot of control over TriMet.
Right. It hasn't been a large influence on the project so far because the state rules require us to allow middle housing on so many lots. It's a large majority of the lots in the city, residential lots. Mm-hmm. So, originally we were kicking around, well, should we allow more near transit and, fewer elsewhere? And that's still a possibility. But because we're required to allow them in so many places, it's almost like it's going to be in most places anyway. So we'll have to see if there are certain limited circumstances where maybe there's more near transit. But
So there's still a lot of questions.
yeah, there's still things to work out.
Yeah.
We're just finishing up with asking people about the 3 alternatives, and we're asking council to kind of narrow down to a preferred approach. But there will still be engagement about that preferred approach and still fine-tuning to do.
You mentioned affordability, both of you.
Mm-hmm.
How important is the affordability question for folks in Beaverton? I imagine that housing prices today are probably 2 or 3 times greater than they were a year or 2 ago.
Well, affordability is very important to a lot of people. That's something we hear consistently in almost every meeting. One thing I've heard from some people is that this project is looking at expanding housing options, different housing types in different neighborhoods. But when we ask people about what housing types they prefer and in what areas, sometimes they just say, well, affordability is what matters. It doesn't matter what housing type it is or what neighborhood, it just needs to be less expensive. So yes, it's very important.
You'd rather not have the roof leak, though. That would help. What kind of a role does race and equity play in the Housing Options Project, in the city's thinking?
Rob, do you want to start?
You want to take that?
Yeah, I can take
Okay.
that one. So a lot of our work is...
Let me preface this, Brian. I don't mean to interrupt, Rob, but Beaverton is a very diverse community,
Mm-hmm.
probably one of the most diverse in Oregon, if not the most.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be a factor included in that.
Yes. Yes. To start, we look to our diversity, equity, inclusion plan for guidance. That's a council-approved document that suggests we use a racial lens for our projects to think of how these projects might benefit certain communities, might burden certain communities. For our project, we started by really taking a look at what research exists and then using that research to frame our engagement and talk to people about what they need. And something we know is that for many communities of color in Beaverton, they're more likely to rent their homes than own. This means they're more likely to live in certain areas, and this separates people by race and income. We know that people are interested in more homeownership opportunities, but housing has become expensive, so it's a problem. And we've heard from many people that they want to live in healthier neighborhoods that are closer to parks and schools, but we don't have those options allowed near a lot of parks and schools because we only allow single-family homes. So looking at things like that has been a good way for us to frame, to define what the problem is and think of how this project can start to address those things. Now, one thing that came up in our research was that we know because certain groups are more likely to live in certain areas. I mentioned earlier that people are separated by race and income. And something we discovered was that in areas that only allow single-family zoning now, those neighborhoods are 76 to 89% white. and that covers a very large area of the city's land. So we know Beaverton's very diverse. We know there's a multicultural community where housing needs are not being met, and yet right in the center of our city, we have large, significantly white areas.
What kind of an impact would this project have on all of the communities, the apartment houses, the multifamily units that already exist, or would it?
Well, those generally the zones where apartments are allowed are going to stay the zoning. The rules for development are going to stay the same. And this because you can already do like most of what we're talking about in those districts anyway.
So that's not going to change a lot.
It's not going to change a lot.
But that's where a lot of the communities of color live, are in the apartments in Beaverton, are they not?
They do. Like I mentioned before, we're a very diverse community, so it might differ based on the community. But we know for like the Latinx community and the Black community and some multiracial communities, they're more likely to live in areas where there's rental housing.
Being a senior citizen, aging in place has become a topic that I'm now more concerned about. Is that a topic that you're concerned about with this project?
It is, and that's something we've heard from the beginning. I think next to affordability, aging in place options is something that comes up a lot. And I think multi-generational too. Yeah, I think they can be, they can overlap. Sometimes they can be different. Multi-generational might mean, a home with 4 or 5 bedrooms, aging in place. Could be someone living in that space, but it could also mean, a smaller cottage in back, or more apartment buildings that have ground zero step entries so that people don't have to take stairs. That's something we hear a lot. Our hope is that we would provide more options that are single level or accessible. I think that might be more likely with cottage clusters and ADUs. ADUs are accessory dwelling units that might be attached or detached to the single family home. But we might also see a lot of townhouses. So I don't want to overpromise and suggest there will be lots of single level living. Townhouses are cheaper to build.
They are.
And they can be divided and sold on lots. So that's going to be appealing to first time homebuyers. So we still have some work to do on figuring out how we can provide more age-in-place solutions.
So you guys have had to be really creative with this, haven't you? You've had to really think outside the box to get this project underway.
Rob has, yeah.
You just have to plan for it. Is there an economic impact on the city with this kind of thinking, this kind of project?
Are you asking from like a fiscal perspective?
Would it be from a fiscal perspective? Yeah. Does the city? Does the city have to incorporate new rules and new regulations and hire new building code inspectors, that kind of thing? I mean, how are you going to be able to pull this off?
Well, we'll see. We expect the number of these units to be relatively modest. It'll be kind of a gradual change over time.
We're not talking thousands then.
Not from what we can tell. There's only so many there's only so many situations where they're feasible for a developer to actually like if a developer wanted to come in and tear down an old house and build a fourplex, there's very few situations where that would make financial sense for a developer, largely because the houses in Beaverton are too valuable. They cost too much to make that work. There probably will be opportunities for homeowners, as we've talked about before, to add a unit or two on the same lot that they're in, and some people will decide to do that. So again, we expect the change to be more gradual. So I don't anticipate a giant staffing up that we need to do at the city, but we will have to monitor that to make sure we're ready.
Have you gotten a clue as to what council wants to do? Have they given you any indication, or you're just waiting until July 27th to find out?
We met with them early in March before we did most of our engagement for this phase. So they got a preview, and I think they were pleased with the variety and curious what the public thinks, and are just keeping an open mind. I think they're going to be very interested in public engagement before they make any decisions.
I'll bet they ask some good questions. Go from there. As I recall, and of course memory is a wicked thing when you're my age, that HB 2001 cites cities of 50,000 or more population. Am I correct in that? Or is
I think it's 1,000.
1,000?
I forget the threshold. I thought maybe it was 10, but it definitely
I've read
applies.
10,
It
I've
applies
read
to
10,
all cities in
yeah.
the metro area.
Okay,
for
so
sure.
Hillsborough is going to be impacted by
Yes.
it, Banks, some of these others. How are you working with them to coordinate kind of a Washington County approach to this, or how are you working that out?
We have an informal working group, which feels more like a study hall. You know, it's unofficial, but Hillsborough planning staff, Washington County, and Beaverton get together monthly and just check in about where we are. We're all approaching the project differently. We're trying to share ideas. We're trying to figure out ways that we can team up for engagement opportunities, even if our approaches are somewhat different. So it's been nice to have that support, and hopefully I think as engagement ramps up, we'll have more opportunities to actually talk to people together.
Is the need the same in Hillsborough as it is in Beaverton, just as a for instance, for affordable housing?
I'm not familiar. I would assume so.
The
but
whole
yeah.
region is
We're all facing it.
Yeah.
has a lot of need. I think the housing prices are and the rents, have been going up in the region. And I mean, everything that we know about affordable housing is that there's, even after the Metro passed their affordable housing bond and some of those projects are starting to get built, it's not near enough to meet the true needs for affordable housing.
We have a supply and demand problem,
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
and that's region-wide. It's not just unique to Beaverton.
Yeah, and it's an income problem for folks too. If you are have a low-wage job or maybe have a disability and are living on Social Security supplemental income, it's just tough to find a place that you can you can.
I wouldn't want to be
make it work.
21 again, that's for sure. You talked a little bit about some of the concerns that folks have, like trees, which is a big deal in the Tree City. We also have, I think, a lot of concern over community. How do we create and how do we maintain the communities that we already have in existing? How is this bill going to do that? How's this project going to try to create the community?
That's an interesting point, because one of the most prevalent themes we've heard from engagement is that new housing should build community. It should not only be affordable, but help build community. And one of our approaches prioritizes open space, and so that neighbors can get to know each other on properties, and the other approaches take a somewhat different stance. And when a lot of people were looking at this, they kept gravitating towards the potential for this option to build community. And it was really quite a diverse group of people who are gravitating towards this. We've done a lot of multicultural outreach. We have a meeting with renters and homeowners, older adults, and a lot of people really see the potential for some of these to help build communities. We've heard that sometimes single-family neighborhoods feel lonely for some folks because there's no place to gather and people don't use their front yards as much. And we've heard from people in large apartment buildings that they don't always have open space to get together. But really, middle housing could provide the potential to bring people together if designed right.
So this is an opportunity.
It is. It is.
When we talk about community as well, we talk about programs that the city provides, the neighborhood program, neighborhood association committees, NACs. Not all NACs are created equal. Not all NACs are equal in terms of participation. Do you see this kind of a project making the NACs a little bit stronger in their presence? Our neighborhood's going to be as important, I guess, going forward.
Yeah, I think so. Yes,
It's not going to diminish the neighborhoods necessarily.
No, I don't think so. I mean, the neighborhood association committees are really important for us. We benefit from going to the Beaverton Committee for Community Involvement, which has a lot of the neighborhood association committee representatives on it.
All of them.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean every neighborhood is represented there. They get to check our work. They get to give express their opinions to us. It improves our projects. I mean, it makes our work better. It makes our work better for sure. They're also a great link to the people who live in the neighborhoods, so we can reach more people and make sure we're responsive to the community. So that's essential, and I don't think it's going to change.
Yeah. I would assume that the legislature did this because they see something coming down the pike that's going to create a housing shortage in the metro area and in other Oregon cities. Would that be a fair assessment, that we are facing perhaps a housing shortage?
Yes. I mean, increasing housing supply has been a big part of the bill, and that's keeping prices high.
But we also have a limited amount of space to increase the housing supply with, right?
We do, but there are a lot of single-family homes on large lots that could support more housing.
So, as a homeowner, I'm not being told that I have to tear down my house and put up a duplex, right?
Correct. No. You can stay in your single-family house for as long as you want. A lot of this, pretty much all of this, is going to be individual homeowners making choices. So the city's not going to make anybody make those changes.
Do you foresee any changes in the relationship that renters have with their landlords because of this legislation, or because of the stuff that you guys have had to put together? Do you think it would have any kind of an impact on that?
I don't know. I mean, all I can think of is the renters might have more choices if we see more of these housing types in the neighborhoods. But for now, at least, there still seems to be plenty of demand for apartments, so it should be.
And I think it establishes the need for a different type of property owner or landlord, because somebody needs to decide to build this housing, and we would need more people interested in providing this housing and more rental options.
We talked a few minutes ago about how little space is left in Beaverton, really, for this kind of new development. Is that a critical problem? Does Beaverton need to expand, perhaps, to find more space?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we're doing that right now. The Cooper Mountain Community Plan is actually working with the community right now to plan for a new neighborhood, north of Mountainside High School, over on the around 175th and Grabhorn on the southwest side, and that's 1,200 acres. We're expecting at least 3,700 units or so, housing units, to be there. And if you go to beavertonoregon.gov/cm, you can check out that project and get involved and help us plan for that.
And if you haven't been out there lately, it's a shock. That's all I can say. But it's a different type of housing development because it's different kinds of housing that's being included in this project, right?
It's really interesting because this law applies there too. So we're going to have to figure out what it looks like for city policies and our development rules, and providing infrastructure. What does it look like to have a new neighborhoods that from the get-go, from the beginning, include a variety of housing? It's kind of exciting.
What's it like being a city planner during a pandemic? How do you plan? What do you plan for?
Well, Rob and I are both on the long-range planning team, so we're looking ahead usually, planning for the city's future, and we kept going. We were still working on the Cooper Mountain Community Plan and the Housing Options Project. The only very difficult part was we really missed face-to-face interaction with the community members, and that we still did engagement, but it was on the screen and it was more difficult. So we're hoping we're turning the tide here and we can start to do one-on-one and in-person engagement again.
And I'll just add to that. I mean, when we were starting this and we realized in-person wasn't happening anytime soon, we started talking internally about how to reach people, and I remember talking to a few folks who recommended that we already have a lot of volunteers that are tightly involved with the city and have connections to other communities. So we really relied on existing relationships, and that's why we started interviewing cultural leaders and then asking for more connections to their community meetings. So it took some time to reach people, but we were able to do so. But of course, we miss in-person meetings.
Do you think you had enough time to deal with what you have to deal with? Was the timetable too short, too long?
It's a little too short.
It's a little more time would have been great. I mean, I think it's worked better than I would have thought, considering it's a pandemic and we have this legislative deadline. But we've gotten the people who are providing feedback are really taking a lot of time to provide really thoughtful comments, and so I'm grateful that they took this time, and hopefully for the next phase we can start to do more in-person events.
We have until June 30th of next calendar year to get our new rules approved.
Do you think you might have to go back at some point and revisit some of the work that you've already done just because you didn't have enough time?
I think we'll be able to do a good job. I mean, we have enough time to do a good job, but it's always a good idea to monitor and see how things are going and revisit it if we need to. The development code we have to look at all the time. It's kind of a thing where you learn from projects that come in and situations that happen in neighborhoods, and then you can adjust. So yeah, we'll take another look at it later.
A work in progress.
Always.
Yeah. Where do I get the best information about the Housing Options Project?
You should go to our website, beaverton.oregon.com
Beaverton, Oregon.
beavertonoregon.gov
Yeah.
/HOP.
I'm used to typing it more than saying it.
HOP. Those are the
HOP.
critical initials.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Rob Zeller, Brian Martin with the City of Beaverton. Gentlemen, this has really been fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you. And good luck going forward. I know you've got a great job ahead of you and a big job ahead of you. So thank you for doing this.
Thanks for the
Thank you
opportunity.
very much.
Really appreciate it.
This is City Talk. I'm Eric Schmidt. Thanks for joining us.